The book of Judges paints a vivid picture of ancient Israel in a time of chaos and moral confusion. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Judges 21 verse 25. This phrase, repeated throughout the book, underscores a society unmoored from justice and order is setting ripe for one of the Bible's darkest tales. In Judges 19, we meet a nameless Levite, a religious figure tasked with upholding God's law. Yet, like much of Israel during this era, even he is caught in a web of personal flaws and a crumbling moral compass. The story begins with him seeking reconciliation with his concubine, who has left him and returned to her father's house in Bethlehem. This concubine, also nameless, is central to the story, yet treated as little more than property in a world dominated by patriarchal norms. After several months apart, the Levite decides to bring her back. His journey to Bethlehem unfolds without incident, and her father welcomes him warmly. The two men seem to bond over shared meals, with the father repeatedly urging the Levite to extend his stay. Days pass in this celebratory atmosphere, but the deeper tension remains. Why did the concubine leave? And what does her return mean for her freedom and dignity? The Bible remains silent on these questions, forcing readers to wrestle with the ambiguity of the characters' motives. Eventually, the Levite insists on leaving, but their delayed departure sets the stage for disaster. Traveling late in the day, the Levite, his servant, and the concubine reach the city of Gibeah, a settlement of foreigners. Despite the servant's suggestion to stop there for the night, the Levite refuses, citing the city's non-Israelite inhabitants as a risk. Ironically, this decision leads them into greater danger as they press on to Gibeah, a town belonging to the tribe of Benjamin. Gibeah, an Israelite town, should have been a place of safety and hospitality. However, as they arrive in the town square, it becomes evident that something is deeply wrong. No one offers them shelter, an ominous sign in a culture where hospitality was considered sacred. Finally, an elderly man from the countryside sees them and extends an invitation to stay at his home, warning them not to remain in the open square overnight. This seemingly small act of kindness becomes a pivotal moment, but the peace is short-lived. What unfolds next will challenge not only our understanding of justice, but the very fabric of the society described in this chapter. As night falls, the Levite and his companions settle into the old man's home, seeking refuge from what should have been a welcoming Israelite town. But the atmosphere in Gibeah is ominous. It doesn't take long for the true nature of the town's inhabitants to reveal itself. What begins as a quiet evening of rest soon becomes a nightmare no one will forget. Soon, a mob of wicked men gathers outside the house. Their voices rise in a chilling chorus of demands. Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him. Judges 19 verse 22. This grotesque and shocking request is eerily reminiscent of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, a parallel that readers of the Bible cannot overlook. Yet, unlike the divine judgment that falls upon Sodom, no such intervention comes for Gibeah. The old man, horrified but desperate, steps outside to address the mob. He pleads with them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing." His words acknowledge the sacred duty of hospitality, in ancient Israelite culture a duty to protect one's guest at all costs. Yet, what follows reveals the twisted moral logic of the time. "Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do to them whatever you wish. But as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing." Judges 19 verses 23 to 24. These words, shocking and abhorrent, lay bare the depth of moral decay in Israel. Women are treated as expendable, their lives and dignity secondary to the social codes of hospitality. The old man's offer is unthinkable, yet it reflects the patriarchal values of a society that has lost its way. When the mob refuses to relent, the Levite takes an unthinkable step. He grabs his concubine and pushes her outside to the crowd, shutting the door behind her. The narrative spares no detail in describing the horror that follows. Throughout the night, the mob abuses her relentlessly. The concubine, already treated as a possession by her husband, becomes the ultimate victim of a society untethered from God's laws. As dawn breaks, the mob finally releases her. Bruised, broken, and near death, she makes her way back to the house where the Levite is staying. The image is haunting. She collapses at the threshold of the door, her hands reaching out in a silent plea. Inside, the Levite sleeps, unmoved by the horrors of the night. When he finally steps outside in the morning, he finds her lying there. Without a hint of compassion, he commands, "Get up, let's go." But she does not respond. The text is ambiguous, but most interpretations agree. She has died from her injuries. Her death is not only a personal tragedy, but a symbol of the catastrophic failure of justice, compassion, and morality in Israel during this time. This section of the story forces readers to confront the depths of human depravity. How could an Israelite town, part of God's chosen people, act with such cruelty? And why does the Levite, a religious figure, respond with such indifference to the suffering of his concubine? The answers are not easily found, but they point to the broader theme of Judges. When society abandons God's laws, chaos and suffering follow. The story is not over, and what happens next will transform this personal tragedy into a national reckoning. The morning after the horrifying events, the Levite's response shocks us almost as much as the events of the night. Stepping outside, he finds his concubine lifeless on the doorstep. Her hands are outstretched, as if in a final plea for mercy. Yet the Levite shows no sign of grief or remorse. Instead, his reaction is chillingly detached. He commands, "Get up, let's go," but she doesn't move. The silence is deafening. At this moment, the Levite makes a grim decision that will reverberate across all of Israel. He takes the concubine's body, loads it onto his donkey, and begins the journey home. The Bible's silence about his thoughts or emotions forces us to fill in the gaps. Was he angry, guilty, or simply numb? Whatever his internal state, what he does next is designed to provoke outrage, and it succeeds. Upon arriving home, the Levite takes the concubine's body and dismembers it into 12 pieces. He then sends these gruesome parcels throughout the territories of Israel. This act, horrifying in its own right, serves as a call to arms, a message that demands a response from the tribes of Israel. Each piece arrives with a clear implication. The atrocity committed in Gibeah is not just a personal tragedy. It is an affront to the entire nation. The Bible records the reaction of the tribes as one of collective shock. Everyone who saw it said, "Such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day the Israelites came up out of Egypt." Judges 19 verse 30. The Levite's message succeeds in stirring the nation from complacency, but it also raises questions. Was this act of dismemberment an appropriate way to seek justice, or was it another sign of the moral chaos that permeated Israel at the time? The story confronts us with difficult truths. The Levite's actions, while effective in rallying Israel, are far from heroic. Instead of protecting the concubine during her life, he uses her death as a tool for his own ends. This moral ambiguity forces us to grapple with the complex realities of human behavior and the consequences of living in a society unmoored from God's guidance. As the tribes prepare for what will become a civil war against the Benjamites, the tragic chain of events set in motion by the Levites' decisions highlights a sobering reality. Even righteous anger, if unchecked, can lead to destruction. This story, raw and unflinching, pushes us to consider the cost of justice and the dangers of moral decay. What comes next is a reckoning, one that will shake Israel to its core and serve as a stark reminder of the consequences of a world without accountability. The events of Judges 19 are not just shocking, they are profoundly unsettling. They challenge our understanding of justice, morality, and the nature of humanity itself. This chapter leaves us with pressing questions. How could a society fall so far? Where was God in the midst of such darkness? And what lessons can we draw from this story today? At its core, Judges 19 illustrates the depths to which humanity can sink when God's laws are ignored. The repeated refrain throughout the book of Judges in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit, is more than just a description of lawlessness. It's a chilling warning. When people abandon divine guidance, moral chaos takes over. The men of Gibeah, the Levite, the old man, and even the broader society of Israel all share responsibility for the horrors of this story. Each character's actions or inactions demonstrate the moral erosion that occurs when selfishness, apathy, and sin go unchecked. This story also highlights the dangers of apathy. The people of Gibeah did not come to the aid of the Levite and his concubine. The broader society of Israel only reacts after the shocking dismemberment of the concubine's body, a gesture so extreme it forces them out of their complacency. How often do we, like the Israelites, ignore injustice until it becomes impossible to avoid? The Levite's actions also speak to a troubling kind of apathy. He doesn't fight to protect his concubine, nor does he show any remorse for her death. Instead, he uses her tragedy to serve his own agenda, underscoring the ways in which indifference to suffering can amplify harm. The Israelites' response to the Levite's gruesome message is swift and decisive. They assemble an army and demand justice from the tribe of Benjamin, who protect the guilty men of Gibeah. This leads to a devastating civil war in Judges 20, resulting in the near annihilation of the tribe of Benjamin. While the initial outrage was justified, the scale of the response raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of justice. Was this bloodshed truly about righteousness, or was it fueled by unchecked anger and vengeance? The Bible leaves these questions unanswered, forcing us to wrestle with the complexities of human justice versus divine justice. Though the events of Judges 19 occurred thousands of years ago, their lessons remain relevant. We live in a world still plagued by injustice, violence, and moral confusion. How often do we turn a blind eye to suffering, waiting for a shocking event to spur us into action? This story challenges us to examine our own lives and communities. Are we upholding justice and compassion, or are we complicit in systems of harm? Do we confront sin and wrongdoing, or do we let apathy guide our decisions? Ultimately, Judges 19 serves as a sobering reminder of humanity's need for God. Without His guidance, even His chosen people fell into chaos. But the story also points toward hope. In the broader narrative of the Bible, these moments of darkness often precede God's intervention and redemption. For believers, this chapter is a call to repentance and a plea to seek justice, mercy, and humility in the face of a broken world. This is not an easy story to read, and it's even harder to process. But its inclusion in Scripture reminds us of its importance. It forces us to confront the darkness within ourselves and our communities while pointing us back to the light of God's truth. Before you go, check out the video on screen right now for another shocking and thought-provoking Bible story. If this story resonated with you or left you with questions, let's talk about it in the comments below. Like this video to help more people discover these powerful stories. And if you're ready for more deep dives into the Bible's most challenging chapters, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell.